Kuno was a young boy born into a fantasy world, carrying the hero's scar across his face. This mark was considered extremely rare and had been left behind by a holy knight. However, the cost of receiving that scar was the permanent loss of his eyesight. Kuno had never known what it meant to see, so he often asked his parents what seeing actually felt like. His father would explain that seeing meant being able to recognize colors and witness all the beautiful creations God placed into the world, adding jokingly that it was also very important for spotting big goth baddies. His mother, on the other hand, always said that losing his eyes was nothing compared to receiving the hero's scar, claiming that it was a small price to pay. Kuno often overheard the household maids whispering sadly about him being blind, which annoyed him deeply because he only wanted to be treated like a normal boy his age. Before long, he was assigned a magic instructor as well, something he did not like very much, since he could not understand what magic could possibly do for someone who could not see. One of the maids guided him toward the room where his new magic tutor was waiting. Along the way, Kuno asked her what the point of learning magic was if he could not even walk by himself, and needed someone to hold his hand all the time. The maid understood his frustration and explained that he was born with a water crest on his forehead, which meant he possessed extremely high magical affinity, especially toward water magic. She told him that if he learned to use it properly, he could achieve great things for both himself and the world. Kuno did not fully agree, but he chose not to argue as the maid opened the door. Inside, his new tutor Jen was waiting for him. The blue-haired nerdy baddie greeted him warmly, and introduced herself before beginning their very first lesson. The lesson turned out to be surprisingly easy for Kuno, as he quickly managed to make the tip of his staff wet using a simple spell. Jen praised his talent, and Kuno asked what exactly he had done with the magic. Jen explained that he had simply cast a basic spell that created a blob of water about the size of an eyeball. At that moment, a sudden realization struck Kuno and he grabbed at his empty eye sockets, terrifying Jen, who briefly thought he was one of those overly sensitive kids who could not take a joke. But Kuno suddenly shouted that if he could make water blobs the size of eyeballs, then he could also create his own eyes. How he managed to connect those ideas is unclear, but anime logic does not need explanations. As time passed, Kuno was no longer as gloomy as before and began to enjoy experiencing the world through touch, taste, and smell. He became fascinated by different textures, foods, and scents around him. He happily munched on lettuce without knowing what he was eating, while the maid described everything to him in detail, saying that preparing food felt more meaningful than ever. She even rubbed blueberries against his face as he tried to make sense of the sensations. Soon after, his teacher arrived to continue his lessons, forcing him to leave. His tutor Flora was a total mommy type and asked him what he wanted to study that day. Kuno replied that he wanted to read history and specifically learn about the story of the Holy Knight Hugh. Flora was slightly surprised, since Hugh was the very reason Kuno had lost his sight, but the maid gave her approval. Flora told Kuno to let her know if he ever felt uncomfortable or overwhelmed. Kuno assured her that he wanted to learn everything he possibly could. He soon learned about the history of his world and how a massive war once broke out between demons and humans, with humanity on the verge of defeat. Just when all hope seemed lost, a hero named Hugh the Holy Knight emerged, and finally defeated the Demon King, bringing peace back to the world. However, Hugh was cursed by the Demon King, and ever since then, each generation of his bloodline has randomly been born missing something. Some are born without legs, others without teeth, and some without their eyes. Because of this, people began calling the disabled descendants of Hugh the reincarnations of the hero himself, as all of them carry the hero's scar. Kuno does not really agree with this ideology, as he believes that he is more than just the reincarnation of Hugh. He sees himself as his own individual, and the magical abilities he possesses belong to him alone, not something borrowed from a hero who died long ago. He trains his magic every single day and continues to improve, hoping that one day he will finally be able to create his own personal set of eyes that were taken from him. However, this intense training comes with a heavy cost, as practicing so much magic drains a huge amount of mana and stamina. Eventually, he collapses to the ground, and his maid carries him back inside. When he wakes up, he is frustrated and complains that at this pace, it will take forever for him to gain his own eyes if his stamina does not increase soon. The maid gently reminds him that he is still only 7 years old, and needs to build his body properly if he wants to grow stronger. Kuno replies that they need to find another solution, since he is already passing out from using the most basic spells, which should not be happening at all. His maid Aiko suggests that maybe he could start using physical training, just like strong warriors do, and with sword practice, he might soon gain enough stamina to cast as many spells as he wants. Kuno agrees with the idea, and Aiko immediately leaves to search for a suitable swordmaster to train him. The very next day, Aiko finds an old swordmaster named Oru, who begins training Kuno. He manages to get through the basic sword techniques on his very first day, and soon after, Jen arrives for his magic lessons. Jen is surprised by how hard he is working and asks whether he wants to take a break. Instead, Kuno calmly puts the sword down and prepares his wand for the next lesson. Jen is unsure how much stamina he has left, so she decides to test whether he remembers what they practiced last time. Kuno chants the spell right away, but instead of creating a single water ball, he produces nearly 10 perfectly clear water spheres at once. Jen is completely shocked, wondering how he managed to master the spell so quickly, and realizes that this boy is truly built different. That afternoon, Kuno receives a visitor from the royal capital, who turns out to be Princess Mairi herself. Since Kuno's birth, she had been engaged to him because he belonged to a noble family and bore the hero's scar, which was extremely significant. However, she never really liked him, as during her last visit, he was gloomy and refused to play with her. Since then, she dreaded the thought of spending her life with such a brooding person. To her surprise, when she sees him this time, he appears completely different, smiling warmly as he welcomes her into his mansion. She immediately asks if something happened, saying that he looks different today. Kuno replies that he has fallen in love with magic, and finally found a purpose in his life. He apologizes for not giving her proper attention during their earlier meetings, and says that he has many new things to tell her. He then creates a water ball in front of her, which instantly excites and impresses her. Wanting to surprise her further, Kuno turns the water ball into a rainbow, which becomes a huge hit. He takes her hand and guides her through the garden as they exchange stories about their lives. Soon, the sun begins to set, and she is forced to return to her carriage and head back to the capital. The next day, Kuno tells Flora that he wants to learn proper gentlemanly manners so he can become a better partner. Even Flora is impressed by his thoughtfulness and begins teaching him the etiquette and courtesy expected of a noble. After that lesson ends, Jen arrives for her class and is stunned by the change in Kuno's behavior as he greets her formally and thanks her for everything she has done for him so far. Jen decides it is time to move him beyond basic spells, and explains that they can now start learning more complex magic that requires controlling multiple elements at once. She explains that water magic can be altered in viscosity, color, temperature, and many other factors, allowing it to be used in countless ways. She creates 2 water balls in front of him and asks him to touch them. Kuno immediately recognizes their shape and feels them, quickly realizing that one is warm while the other is cold. Jen explains that making alterations like this is what truly separates one magician from another. Kuno seems to grasp the idea quickly and creates a water ball, which gently drops into a cup placed in front of him. He then asks Aiko to take a sip, which confuses her a bit, but she chooses not to question him and follows his request. The moment she tastes the water, her expression completely changes as she tells them that it tastes exactly like apple juice. Jen is absolutely stunned by this and feels defeated, thinking about how she spent an entire sleepless night trying to come up with something new to teach him, only for him to master it immediately. That night, Kuno lies awake in his bed, holding a green apple in one hand and a red apple in the other, thinking deeply about how he can understand taste and scent so clearly. Even so, he still does not understand what color truly is, and he realizes that without figuring that out, he will never be able to make finer adjustments to his magic, let alone create a pair of magical eyes for himself. The next morning, while sitting down for breakfast, something suddenly clicks inside his mind. He tells Aiko that he wants milk tea without the milk, which sounds ridiculous, but Aiko does not want to mock him and simply asks him to bring her some water. Kuno forms a water ball in the air and sends it toward her, and in that moment, he realizes that he has been feeling different sensations his entire life. What if those sensations are what people refer to as colors? He picks up a green apple and asks whether it is red, but Aiko assumes he is confused and tells him that it is green, not red. He then picks up another apple and asks if that one is red. Aiko replies that it is indeed red in color. That is when Kuno shocks her by calmly stating that the basket in front of him contains 3 red apples and 2 green ones. Aiko is stunned by this, but Kuno explains that he can feel differences by touching objects and believes he can learn what each color feels like through his fingers. This is a huge breakthrough, and Aiko immediately runs to inform his father about the discovery. His father quickly asks whether Kuno can read books now, and Aiko replies that he is able to trace the color of the ink on the page and read that way. The next morning, Kuno resumes practicing his magic and summons a massive red-colored water ball, saying that he can sense the color more clearly when it is larger. At that moment, his mother calls out to him, breaking his concentration, and the water ball collapses onto them, soaking them in red liquid. His mother faints on the spot, believing that something terrible happened and that her son is covered in blood, which completely confuses Kuno. Aiko then explains that blood is also red, which is why his mother panicked so badly. From a distance, Jin watches the entire scene unfold, thinking that the abilities Kuno is showing go far beyond anything she has ever witnessed before. And she begins to wonder if this boy has the potential to achieve the most prestigious title in the world and become a cerulean wizard.